Finn McCool is a legendary figure in Irish folklore and mythology, known for his wisdom and strength, and also for being the leader of the Fianna, an elite band of warriors who served as protectors of Ireland. Finn is mentioned in numerous tales, such as that of the Salmon of Knowledge. He's famous for having defeated the fire-breathing demon Eileen, or his tragic romance with Grania. To tell us more about Finn and the Fianna, I'm delighted and honored to welcome Natasha Sumner. Hello, Natasha.
Hello.
You are Associate Professor of Celtic Languages and Literatures at Harvard, and you are one of the leading experts of the stories and songs about the hero Finn McCool and his warrior band, the Fianna. So, first question, who is Finn and who are the Fianna?
So there's a simple answer and a complex answer to this question. The simple answer is that Finn and his warriors, those are who we call the Fianna, are the greatest Gaelic heroes. Stories about Finn and the Fianna go back in the written record to our earliest documented Irish literature in the 7th century. And from about the 13th century onward, the Fianna became the most popular topic of literature in Irish and Scottish Gaelic manuscripts. And even when manuscripts stopped being copied, their stories were still being told around the hearth as evening entertainment. Now, the Fianna, they were hardly outlaws. They were essentially the army of the greatest ever High King of Ireland, Cormac MacArt. Cormac MacArt ruled during a legendary golden age in Irish history, and it was the Fianna that were helping him maintain peace. But of course, Finn and the Fianna didn't just hang out at Cormac's royal residence at the Hill of Tara that whole time. They spent most of their time wandering the wilderness of Ireland, providing for themselves by hunting and looking out for threats. Sometimes those threats would be foreign invaders coming to try to put Ireland under tribute, and other times those threats would be otherworldly. They would be the Tuatha De Danann acting up, trying to take back some kind of power, and the Fianna are going to come in and save the day and fight them. So the stories about them are set all throughout the Gaelic world, from the southernmost tip of Ireland to the Scottish Outer Hebrides. No matter where in Ireland or Scotland you are, there's going to be a story about the Fianna, having defeated some kind of foe there. So that makes them really, really easy for a wide range of people to identify with them, to claim them as their own. So that, I think, is one of the biggest reasons why they're so popular, why people all across this broad range of territory really love them.
Okay, thank you. So could you tell us about one of the most famous stories about Finn and the Fianna? The one you think everyone should know about to get to know Finn and the Fianna.
There are hundreds of stories about Finn and the Fianna, but there are only a few that are really, really well known today. They appear in school books, they appear in children's literature, sometimes even tourist marketing, and these are essentially the story of the Salmon of Knowledge, the story of Diarmid and Grania, the story of Oisin in Tir na Nog in the Land of Youth, and the story of the Giant's Causeway. Probably one of the most popular is still the story of the Salmon of Knowledge. Finn is a boy. He's out in the wilderness. He comes across this man named Finn Agus. So another Finn the poet. This man is fishing. He's fishing in a very special pond that has had hazelnuts dropping into it. Hazelnuts are associated with knowledge and the other world, and he's fishing for a salmon that has consumed one of these hazelnuts. And this is the Salmon of Knowledge. So Finn Agus is fishing for the Salmon of Knowledge so that he can be the most knowledgeable man in the world. Finn comes along and says, "Hi, can I help you with what you're doing?" Finn Agus says, "Yeah, absolutely. You can help me out." And at that moment, he catches the salmon and he puts the salmon on to roast, and he needs to go off and get more wood for the fire. And he says, "Finn, watch this salmon. When I cook it and eat it, I will have all of the knowledge in the world. I'll be right back. Just make sure that it doesn't burn." And so Finn does this, and he realizes there's a blister forming on the skin of the salmon. That can't happen. So what does he do? He takes his thumb and he puts his thumb on the blister, but of course it's hot. It's cooking over a fire, so he burns his thumb. He immediately puts his thumb in his mouth, and all of a sudden Finn has become unintentionally the first person to taste of the salmon of knowledge. He gets all of the knowledge of the other world, and from that point forward, all he has to do, according to some stories, is put his thumb in his mouth and he can access hidden otherworldly knowledge. According to other stories, it's not so simple. He has to take his thumb and put it in his mouth and chew it to the bone, and from the bone to the marrow, and then he gets the knowledge. So that, I think, deters him from maybe using this special gift too much. But that is one of the things that Finn is associated with. He's associated with knowledge specifically through his thumb of knowledge.
As you mentioned, by the way, Finn was obviously not only famous in Ireland, but also among other places in Scotland. And my question would be, are the Irish and Scottish stories always the same, or do they tend to somehow differ?
Ooh, that's a good question. So both Ireland and Scotland were once part of what we might call a cultural continuum. They look separate today. I mean, they're part of separate countries today. They're on separate islands, but they're really only separated by this little channel, the North Channel, or Srun na Muila in Gaelic, which at an earlier period in time acted like more of a highway than a barrier. And there would have been an awful lot of back and forth between Ireland and Scotland, whether we're talking about educated Scots who attended the Gaelic professional schools in Ireland, or Irish poets who went north to Scotland, or the Scottish Gallowglass mercenaries who fought for Irish lords. There was also a shared culture across all of the different regions in Ireland and Scotland, and Finn and the Fianna were heroes not just of Ireland, but of the Gaels. So they belonged as much to the Scots as to the Irish. We see regional and sometimes national differences within the folklore record, for instance. There's a particular Scottish ecotype about the story of Finn's birth. In Irish versions of the story, Finn is born and he's taken away into hiding after the death of his father Cúl at the hand of Gall MacMorna, who's another Fenian. Cúl had been pushed out as leader of the Fianna. In early literary versions, it's because Cúl had a forbidden relationship with the daughter of the High King's Druid, and Gall had been made the new leader of the Fianna, and they battle, and Cúl is killed. And of course, Finn is secreted away into hiding until he's old enough to take back the Fianna. Now, in the Scottish folktale, it's a little bit different. The Fianna under Cúl have become really rebellious, and so the kings of Ireland and Scandinavia conspire together to put Cúl to death by tempting Cúl to marry the King of Lochlin's daughter. So he does that, and then on the wedding night, an Irish outlaw by the name of Arca Dubh, dark-haired Arca, stabs Cúl with his own sword in his wedding bed. So that is the Scottish version of how Cúl dies. It's very dramatic, and it really reflects the multiformity of folklore very well.
And what about the story of the Giant's Causeway, where Finn is the central character? Doesn't it unite Irish and Scottish tales somehow and connect both traditions, both areas?
So the story of the Giant's Causeway is interesting because it's become very, very, very popular. It's used for tourist marketing for the Giant's Causeway. And the story of the Giant's Causeway begins with Finn maybe getting a little bit bored. He's hanging out in the north of Ireland, and he's got a little house there with his wife, and he's looking across the sea, across the North Channel to Scotland, and thinking, I wonder what's over there. I've heard that there's a really big giant over there, and I wonder if I can defeat him. And he decides that he's going to build a bridge to Scotland, and this is what he does. And if you've ever been up to the Giant's Causeway, you'll notice that there are all of these hexagonal basalt columns stretching partway out into the sea. Well, according to the story, those didn't always stretch partway out into the sea. They stretched all the way across to Scotland. So Finn built this bridge. He wakes up the next morning, and what does he see? The Scottish giant has discovered the bridge and is on his way over. And as he approaches, he gets bigger and bigger and bigger and blots out the sun. And Finn realizes, oh no, I have made a huge mistake. What am I going to do? And his wife says, oh, Finn, we can fix this. Here's what you're going to do, Finn. You are going to put on this baby bonnet and you are going to get into the cradle. Finn is a very large warrior. So here he is. This is the comical element of the story, getting into the cradle with this baby bonnet on. So the giant comes knocking and says, oh, hello, Mrs. Finn. I'm looking for Finn McCool. I want to battle him. I hear that he's looking to battle me. And Finn's wife says, oh, not a problem. He's actually out today. He should be back in a little bit. Would you like to just come in and have tea? But what she has done in the meantime is she has taken the griddle on which she bakes bread and she has inserted it into a loaf of bread to bake, just one. And so this is what she's going to serve for tea for this giant. So the giant sits down and she says, oh, well, you have some bread. I've just baked some lovely loaves. I'm going to give one to the baby over here and you can have the other one. Of course, she gives the one that is unadulterated, has no big sheet of iron in the middle of it, to Finn, and he eats it no problem. And she gives the very hard one to the giant. The giant bites down on it and breaks his tooth and goes, oh my gosh, this loaf is so incredibly hard. And Finn's wife says, oh no, this is what Finn and his child eat every day. And the giant says, oh gosh, they must be very strong. Let me go and test the child's teeth. And so he goes over and he puts his finger in Finn's mouth to test the child's teeth. And what does Finn do? He chomps down on the giant's finger and bites it off. So here the giant is thinking once again, oh my gosh, if this is what Finn's child can do, I am no match for Finn. And he gets very nervous at that point and he runs back to Scotland. And as he does so, he tears up much of the Giant's Causeway and leaves it in the state that it's in today. So that's basically the story of the Giant's Causeway, with some storytelling liberties, perhaps. And that's how we know it from popular literature and popular culture today. Now, this story is not necessarily told about the Giant's Causeway. It could be told about many different locations and often isn't associated with Scotland at all.
All right, and this story actually comes from a rather modern or recent corpus, that of the folklore. So my question would be, how old are the oldest tales about Finn and the Fianna? And perhaps more importantly, can we see an evolution of the characters and their stories through time?
Yeah, the first instance of the word Finn in history dates back to the 7th century. So stories about Finn and the Fianna have been around as long as written literature in the Gaelic languages has been around. In the earliest stories, they were just a small warrior band out in the wilderness, not usually battling invaders so much as the otherworldly opponents, the Tuatha Dé Danann. And at the very earliest period, these fictional Fianna probably reflect the social practice that gave rise to stories of Fenian warriors in the first place. What we call the Fian, we might define this as the Fenian warrior band, would have been made up of young men of the property class. So upper class young men who had aged out of osterage, but they don't yet qualify to basically full rights of citizenship. So instead of just hanging out at home and being, young and unruly, what they would have done is they'd have temporarily gone off to join a Fian band out in the wilderness where they could enjoy their freedom, probably also hone their fighting skills with other Fian bands before coming back. And it's probable that Fenian stories first became popular among men who were in Fian bands themselves, or maybe men who used to be in Fian bands. But when that historical practice disappeared by the middle of the 9th century, the stories didn't die, they just changed to reflect the new social order. So as we move forward in time to periods following the Vikings' arrival in Ireland and Scotland and the Anglo-Norman invasion of Ireland and the really long period of colonization and subjugation of Ireland, we see stories about the Fianna defeating foreign invaders becoming more and more popular. We see the Fianna basically morph into something like a standing army, the sort of thing that territorial leaders in late medieval Ireland would have maintained. So we see them once again changing with the times. Today, on the other hand, some audiences have grown a little bit less fond of these battle for battle's sake plot lines, and I think they're maybe a little bit more interested in stories with a greater emotional or comical element element to them. So tastes are changing as well over time.
All right, so precisely about this change in taste and evolution as a whole, it is often argued that Finn's lore is, or perhaps used to be, about man, for man, by man. Is it true, or, what do you think about that?
Back in the mid-20th century, basically at the height of folklore collecting in Ireland, the head of the Irish Folklore Commission, James Delargy, famously said that the stories about Finn and the Fianna were primarily associated with male storytellers, and women were not supposed to tell them. And he quoted a saying that actually seems to be very rare indeed. I've spoken to experts in proverbial lore, and they have not encountered this saying. And the saying goes, a woman telling Fenian stories or a crowing hen. So basically, hens don't crow and women don't tell Fenian tales. Now, it's absolutely true that more stories about the Fianna have been collected from men, but I think Delargy went too far in saying that women were not supposed to tell them. The longest and most complex Fenian stories would have taken a really long time to tell, sometimes even several nights, and they would have been pretty much reserved for the recognized star storytellers within a community who were generally elderly men. Women would have had far too much work to do in the evenings to be able to tell stories that take several nights to tell at social gatherings. And maybe it wasn't even socially acceptable for them to perform publicly in that way. But we have evidence of women telling Fenian tales. There are several men who told long, complex hero tales in the early 20th century who said they got their tales from women. How could that happen? Well, they probably would have heard them from caregivers, whether they're mothers or their aunts or other women in the community. And that is certainly not evidence that women were not supposed to tell the tales. That is quite the contrary. Women told the tales. They told the tales perhaps to other women. They told the tales to children. They told them not so much in public contexts.
Okay, time for the final question. I've heard you have created an online database called the Finn Folklore Database. So could you tell us a bit more about this project?
Yeah, thanks for asking about the database. This has been my pet project for the last decade or so. We have gone through archival index cards and published lists of Fenian tales and done our best to catalog as many Fenian tales as possible, collected across Ireland, Scotland, the Isle of Man, England, the United States, and Canada. Over 3,600 stories and songs are now easily accessible online. The second big achievement, I think, is we devised the first comprehensive classification system for Fenian folklore. All you need to do is go to the Stories and Songs page, and you can see all of the different Fenian tale types we came up with that basically allow researchers to work comparatively with this corpus that's spread across many, many archives and a really broad geographical region. And of course, there are other really cool things about the database. We've got an interactive map that you can browse to see where Fenian folktales have been collected. We've got a really detailed faceted search option that allows you to narrow down search results. And the other thing that we do is we link out to digitized material online. So if you want the story of Finn's boyhood, or you want the story of Finn in the Cradle, or you want the story of Diarmid and Grania, who we didn't get to talk a lot about, but people know very much about, and you want to read that or listen to that, if it's digitized, we link to it. You can get it right on your computer through the database.
We hope you enjoyed the Finn Folklore Database just as much as we do and appreciate how awesome it is. By bringing together the best of modern technology and ancient tradition, it keeps Fenian folklore alive and accessible for researchers, for storytellers, and future generations. Hopefully it will be a source of inspiration for other scholars in the years to come. So that's it. Thanks again to Natasha, and thank you for your patience. I wish we could release more videos like that, but it takes time and we all have demanding jobs. So sorry, I guess. But don't worry, there's more to come in the following weeks and months. Please share this video if you liked it and leave a comment. It's always nice to connect with you people. Alright, thank you. See you. Bye-bye. Slán.